This is the Midlife Mischief Club podcast with John and Alvin.
Hey guys, John here. I can't wait for you to hear our conversation with Sabine Hirsohn, who recently spent 2 years sailing around the world with her brother Louis. Sabine is a musician, playing the viola and violin, and before her journey was an elementary school principal in Napa, California. As you'll hear, this was an epic adventure, and we decided to post this conversation in 2 parts. Here's episode 1. We hope you enjoy it.
I had the opportunity to meet you on a sail.
On a boat.
And yes, our friend Amy introduced us, and then I just learned that you just happen to be someone who not long ago finished a 2-year sail around the world.
That's right.
And we're keen to learn more about this 2-year sail.
Mm-hmm. Well, where to begin? I suppose begin at the beginning. Well, first of all, I've been sailing, not obviously, but I have been sailing all my life. Born in Ireland, as you can probably hear, which is a small island, and the ocean is never very far away. And family on both maternal and paternal sides have sailed forever and ever and ever and ever. Mostly sort of cruising style boats. But I, and actually my brother, who sailed around the world with me, my brother and I started a little bit with dinghies, smaller boats, and I really loved that because it doesn't take quite so long to get out.
Yeah,
There's
right.
not so much responsibility. You can do it by yourself or just 2 of you.
It's sporty.
It's
I love
really
dinghy
fun.
sailing.
Yeah, it's fast, and there was racing, and there weren't that many women doing it, so I often could win the women's race.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So that was kind of a bonus. And we lived, when I grew up, we lived in a gorgeous little sort of Victorian seaside village south of Dublin in the county of Wicklow. Right, a beautiful big long beach, and they had this rinky-dink sailing club, and we used to rent, and in the end actually my father and I built a mirror, which is an 11-foot wooden little sort of
Nice.
dinghy boat sort of thing with red sails. I mean, you see them all over England and Ireland. You don't see them quite so much here. Sort of like a precursor to a laser. You know what I mean by a laser? I think you see
that's
lasers
what I grew
here.
up sailing.
No,
John
sa-
grew up sailing. So we've got 3 different sailors.
Just smaller boats. I'm not a great sailor, but I really do enjoy being out on the water, for sure.
You don't need to be great. You just need to have fun and be safe.
Yes.
Obviously, that's
Yeah.
very important also. In fact, talking of safety, my brother and I, and this is something that has stuck with me because it was such a near miss. Our family had still has a summer house on the west coast of Ireland. The winter house is on the east coast in the Dublin kind of area. Anyway, we have a laser out there, and my brother and I, who were the ones who loved to sail, we have a sister also in the middle. He's the youngest, I'm the eldest. Decided we'd go sailing on the laser. And I don't know if you know much about sailing in Ireland, but it's similar to the bay here.
Is it?
Always fast and furious,
Rough,
and rocks and waves and sandbanks and squalls and all of that, and currents. That's the big thing. Anyway, off we go sailing, and we're both pretty experienced sailors, but for some reason we had neglected to put life jackets on.
Oh no.
And there we were. Nobody was watching us. And there's nobody anywhere. There's nobody on the water because they probably looked at the weather forecast, which we hadn't done. And we giggle, but it's not really, not a good thing to do. And anyway, one thing led to another. Lasers tend to capsize fairly easily. And there was a big squall came
the
in.
time.
It capsized, and I was on my way out to sea. And my brother put his hand out and grabbed my foot. And if he had not done that, I would probably not be sitting here today.
Holy cow.
It was a really and we got such a fright. We went straight in and we said, okay, lesson learned.
Yeah.
Very lucky.
There's some daredevil in you to go, out to go around the world. Was there that daredevil part of you, like always?
Probably, yes. I think it's a family trait. My grandfather used to forget what you call it. But he used to race cars sort of on dirt tracks with no helmets and nothing, no seat belts, nothing. And
I think you call that crazy.
Yeah. Well, he was
it.
completely crazy, and he was an amazing sailor. But in fact, God, there's so many stories. But when I was probably just about to leave school, high school that is, I went on a trip with my grandfather. I adored my grandfather, and a sailing trip. And we sailed. We were on the west coast of Ireland, and we were going to go around the bottom of Ireland and then up through. There's a river that goes through the centre of Ireland called the Shannon River, which is quite a wide river, and you can sail up there. And we were not on a very big boat. It was probably, I don't remember exactly, maybe 42-foot boat. That was his boat. And we set sail on the appointed, or we set out from the land on the appointed day, and we both love crab, so we had a big bag of fresh crab with us to eat. And my grandmother drove us there, and she was the only one who was there. And the first thing was, he said, "Oh, darn it, I forgot to bring the charts, but not to worry, I have road maps." So we were with road maps. Of course, I didn't, I trusted him implicitly. And then we get on the dinghy to row out to the boat, which is going up and down on these massive waves, and the dinghy starts losing air. So he's rowing and I'm pumping it with air. He's rowing. This should have been a red flag, but not at all. This was exciting to me. So anyway, we set sail, and we did get to our destination, and we sailed day and night without charts, and he would send me up to the bow and say, "Listen really carefully, and if you hear some rough water, then you know there are probably rocks there. Let me know."
Yikes.
So speaking of daredevil, again, I shouldn't be laughing because one should never do that. And when my father found out afterwards, he was very angry. And even though he's a daredevil himself, he was pretty angry. But anyway, having said all of that, my brother is not at all like that. He's very organized, very safety conscious. And there was always briefings, and we did nothing without making sure that all of the weather was aligned and the currents and everything.
I want to ask some basic factual things.
Okay.
How big was the crew?
Okay. So the core crew were three of us. So myself, my brother, and we had a paid, well, he sometimes was a skipper, sometimes a first mate. It depended on which leg of the trip. And so there were three of us always there. Yeah. Then my nephew, Louis, my brother Louis's son, joined us, and he was 15, and he joined us for 10 months. So then now there were four of us in the core crew. Wow. And then we'd have people cycle in and out.
Right. I guess the total number, though, I want to picture.
6 was our maximum, with a couple of exceptions. When my kids joined us, we had a few more. I think there were 7 of us then, or maybe 8 even. And then when we did racing, we would have people come on board for a little bit.
What's the length of this oyster boat?
65 feet, 20 meters.
I see.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting to know that this is there are blue water boats and there are not blue water boats, and this is ready to go.
Absolutely,
around the
luxury blue water cruiser. That's what they advertise themselves.
Very interesting.
As. And it is the most beautiful British craftsmanship. It's luxurious. Wood. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous. Everything is, and the galley beautifully designed. For aesthetically and also for using.
Efficiency and practicality.
Exactly. Yeah. And the one sort of positive and negative in one package is because it's luxury, there are a huge amount of systems on board to make it comfortable. And of course, systems
everything
can go wrong, especially when you're bouncing around the world.
Sure.
And
I don't think the average person realizes that these boats it's common for them even to make water from salt water.
Oh, totally.
Potable water.
Absolutely have to. You have to have that.
Yeah.
Water maker.
And those can break.
And they did on our boat, yes.
No.
But my brother is a spectacular engineer, so that helps. Also, we've all sailed all our lives, so that helps. And the longest leg was across the Pacific, the South Pacific. And that was 3 weeks at sea, seeing absolutely nothing. And I mean, sometimes we saw other boats, but not.
So
not
this is
often.
fascinating. This is a passage on the largest ocean in the world, the Pacific.
The largest geographical feature on
Of
this
the
planet.
world, of Earth,
Yes,
largest body of anything on the Earth.
Exactly.
And you saw, I'm imagining, for 3 weeks, no land.
No land.
See, isn't that
I can't even imagine.
It's heaven.
It must.
It's not everybody's heaven, but it's certainly my heaven.
Well, and how do you sort of prepare for that, or how, when you're surrounded by four walls, or even just your town or city and cars and everything, to go out into the nothingness, into the void almost, where really it's you, your ship, your crew, of course, and the water.
Right.
And there's nothing, and as you said, maybe no land for weeks at a time.
Yeah, and we did that multiple. I mean, there were multiple
Sure.
passages of that. That just happened to be the longest one. But, it isn't for everybody, obviously. And there's a number of preparations you can make. I mean, first of all, this is in no particular order, but it's really important that the crew get along. So picking the crew for a long passage is very important.
Oh, yeah.
And Louis, my brother, put a lot of effort into that.
Yeah, I've heard stories of world travelers actually stopping off to drop off a passenger because they've had it with that person.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Yes, yeah. Well, and I would say we had two tricky moments in terms of personnel. And one of them, I don't really know, that the chap was very unhappy, and so he just spent a lot of time in his cabin.
Yeah.
And it was a little uncomfortable for all of us, but obviously it was very uncomfortable for him. And then another chap who had never sailed in his life before and was sort of at our kind of age looking for something interesting to do.
Sure.
And did some sailing courses prior. And decided he'd try this out, and it just was not for him. He learned that he is a land lover, and so there was no bad feelings or anything. He just left early.
It just wasn't for him.
It just was not for him at all. And he really tried hard. He really did. So, but apart from that, I think everybody who came had done some sailing. But the other thing in terms of preparation from my brother and my point of view was we sailed across the Atlantic in 2017, and so that was kind of like the trial run to see if we kind of like this. I mean, we weren't planning the round the world at that point, but we knew that we enjoyed doing it.
And how long did that journey take?
So that was 15 days.
Okay, so reasonable.
Yes. Oh yeah.
A reasonable journey, but still.
Yeah, and it can be. We were very lucky again because we had great navigators, and the other thing we always had, which I think if anybody is planning on doing this, I highly recommend it, is we always had somebody on land who was following us all the time, who knows about navigation and weather and all that sort of stuff, and he could advise us. I'm sick, because he had, if you're on land, your equipment is more sensitive.
Sense,
yeah.
Right.
And so he would advise us, maybe stay in port for another 2 days. I'm seeing a weather system out there or whatever. Things like that.
Houston, what does it look like?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
There you go. Yeah.
And you had many roles, of course. You were not only a sailor, like taking night shifts like everybody, which is an interesting question right there, like what it's like to be in the middle of the ocean for hours with no light. And then also, I'm curious to know, you were a boat chef, and what are some things? What are the different roles that
I had? Yeah, and we all had lots of roles because there were often only 3 of us, sometimes 4, sometimes 5, and 4 and 5 was what was mostly. But anyway, so I was the medical officer, which was a little frightening, actually, to tell you the truth. But, there were lots of courses we had to do ahead of time. So every single one of us had to do the next step up from CPR, which is called first provider. I think it's called different things in different countries. So we all had to do that. And I did mine in San Diego and at the Maritime Institute. And when I'd finished it, I was even more terrified because I learned what I don't know.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And what I might have to do not knowing. Other thing we did, which again is very expensive, but I think vital, and that is we signed up for an organization called MSOS, which is Medical Services Offshore. I think that's what it's called. It's out of England. And they give you 24-hour, wherever you are, because we have a satellite phone on board, 24-hour, you can talk to a doctor. In England, doesn't matter when they are, but you can talk to a doctor 24/7.
That's great. Yeah,
Really
that's actually
amazing.
really cool.
It is really cool. And along with it comes a kit with everything is color coded and numbered. So the doctor, and we had to do this, would say, go to, the big day cruise.
Blue 7.
Yes, yeah, that's why you said that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And, look for this. And it was fantastic.
Wow.
'Cause my brother, as I said, has asthma. That didn't really rear its ugly head, but he also is very allergic to shellfish.
Oh, no.
So that was that. We had a few little incidences of that, and he just happened to be a bit accident prone at the beginning of the trip. So, and people, we had a chap who we thought was having a heart attack, and he actually left early because we were about to go on a passage, and I just said, this is too frightening. I do not want to be arriving with a body bag.
Yeah.
So
goodness.
it turns out it wasn't the case, but it could have been. Anyway, that was great. So that was one of my hats. And what I did with that too was I took everybody's blood pressure and pulse and all that sort of thing about once a week, just to make sure everybody was okay. And it just sort of kept me thinking
in
about
the
it.
mindset.
Yes,
of
exactly.
that. Interesting.
Exactly, yeah. And then I was I think it's too glamorous to call myself a chef, but I was the cook, which was, I love cooking anyway, as you know.
You just blew me away when we were sailing. The lunch you made, John, I just wanted to have it twice a week.
But that was cooked in the land kitchen. But still,
Right.
I even though I say it myself, I did a pretty good job because I like to, I like every side of cooking, the challenge, and there's always somebody who doesn't like this and doesn't like, you
Of
have
course,
to sort of adjust, and then provisioning is a nightmare and also spectacularly great fun because you get to go to all the markets and wherever you happen to be.
Get the freshest
food markets,
fruit and vegetables.
And you get to meet people through that.
Wow.
Just fabulous. And then, you're at sea and you're rolling around and there are 5 hungry guys up there because I was the only female, and you got to feed them. And, they look forward in a way, especially when you're at sea, the cadence of meal times is, really the cadence of everything, when everything happens is very important. And meal times had to be pretty precisely timed, which is not something I like to be, anchored down to. So we had breakfast, I prepared 3 meals, and then we added a 4th meal every day, which was afternoon tea, because I love tea. And our skipper, Rob, our second skipper, he is English. Actually, both our skippers were, but he was really into afternoon tea. So 4:00 on the dot every single day. And then it came about, again, my fault, that there would be a cake or some cookies or something as well. So so none of us lost weight.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, you're probably expending a tremendous amount of
you're
calories.
moving all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. And that's an interesting thing in terms of since I've come back, I've had a lot of trouble with my knees. And I realize it's because for so long I was doing this.
Wow.
And now my poor little knees are hitting concrete and, up and down stairs. And but anyway, they're getting better. But I realized that was just one of the fallouts.
One of the re-entry realizations.
Yes. That's right.
And I'm interested
At my advanced age.
we want to ask you how this changed you as a person, right? Because you left one Sabine and came back another.
Yeah. It's such a hard thing to answer that, but yeah, I mean, there's many things. I think it's almost cliched in a way, but I think the most, for me personally, and I think my brother would probably mirror this, and we're very, very close, but I think we come from a family of doers. We're very much doing people. My father was a businessman, very successful businessman, and I'm trying to not be a doer, or to be less of a doer.
Coming from being a school principal and performing violist.
So yeah, I'm just trying to, sit down at meal times, just sit in the backyard and do nothing.
Being more present.
Yeah, just, and I've always meditated, so I try to pretend that I do that. I used to pretend, but now I'm really trying to do it.
Yeah.
And just notice, if there's a outside my back door in my house, I can always see the rising moon, and so I just take a moment. Whereas before I'd be zipping off to a rehearsal and it would just be in the periphery. Now I'm just trying to really, and just be, as you say, be more present. Just
kind of appreciate the
slow
moment.
down. Slow down, and that's probably an age thing as well. But on a boat, you do one thing at a time. You're just doing one thing. You're sailing the boat, or you're relaxing and reading your book,
right,
or you're cooking, or you're whatever. Whereas at home, you're answering the phone while you cook. Yeah. You're,
multitasking, which means
is
doing 10 things badly.
Exactly. And I think that's what was so wholesome and just so kind of fills your bucket on a boat, is that you're just doing one thing at a time. It's so lovely. I had many magical moments, as you can imagine. Some of them were seeing, humpback whales. Well, I should remind me to tell you that story, but just wildlife,
Wow.
wildlife associated things
Yeah.
that are just so magical. Magical village visits, just the magic of being with my brother for so long and having that connection, and just the feeling of sailing, which is just so blissful. But one of my favorite moments was this one particular night watch, which, if I remember rightly, was between Panama and the Galapagos Islands, Panama City and the Galapagos Islands.
And I think it's interesting just to highlight, a night watch is something a lot of people don't realize. Everyone else on the crew can be sleeping. It can be just you and the ocean. And I've heard stories about people seeing things where they actually had to wake other people to see there's luminescent dolphins.
That's right. I saw plenty of those.
That are basically...
It's the phosphorescence lighting up the dolphins,
And anyway, I don't want to interrupt your story,
No,
but
but you're right.
experiences when everyone else is sleeping.
It's just you.
For miles around, it's you and darkness.
Yeah. And I mean, often there's the moon or the stars, but sometimes there isn't, But this particular night, there was definitely a slim moon. It wasn't a full moon, and there were stars. So there was light, and I would come on my night watch, check with the person before, anything to report, etc., check the log rather, and then I would do my yoga at that point, and then I would, when you're doing yoga at night watch, there's lots of stops because you have to check the instruments and you have to look around and all this. So I incorporated that into this whole yoga practice that I kind of developed, which was for me was fabulous. But anyway, this particular night, and sometimes I would listen to a book or sometimes I would listen to music, but I wasn't. And it's discouraged. You don't want to put two things in because you have to hear. So you just put one thing in, or you have it playing quietly in the background. But anyway, I didn't have anything on because it was just so magical. And there was a moment, and I couldn't tell you for how long, where I just truly felt that I was part of this whole thing, that I am nature, me and there's no separation. It's just, we're just all intertwined together in this sort of swirling mess. It was just the most gorgeous feeling.
A flow state.
Flow state. And it's not often that one gets I mean, I certainly, it may be the only time I've ever really felt like that. I mean, I know playing music sometimes I get into that, but that's not quite the same. This is with nature. It was absolute. It was because it wasn't really till afterwards. It wasn't during it that I realized, it was afterwards looking back. Oh yeah, it was just fabulous.
It's kind of what you strive for with something like meditation, where you lose yourself to the point where you really do feel connected to everything. It is sort of, the oneness. And I know it sounds woo or hokey, but really, that is who we used to be. We used to be so attuned to nature, to animals, to what was around us, to the sea, that now it does take sometimes kind of a Herculean journey to kind of get ourselves back to that. And that must be such an amazing feeling to really be sitting in the middle of an ocean. Maybe even somewhat awe-inspiring to be in the middle of that and really have that kind of understanding or realization or feeling.
Yeah, it was very lucky. I mean, I recognize in all of this how lucky I am, because it's not something that people can often do.
Let me ask about your landing in remote villages. How were you received by these people? You had the power to go anywhere in the world you want, and they maybe have, their whole life was a short radius.
Yeah. Well, this is one of the positive sides of COVID, I think anyway, was that they hadn't seen people. A lot of places we went hadn't seen people for years.
That's fascinating.
So they were just so happy to see us, but they were also...
Because it's not necessarily going to be welcoming.
Yeah, no, I know that, But the route is the standard route, because you're following the trade winds. So, otherwise it's not safe. I mean, there are many choices within the route, but so some of these places are used to yachts arriving.
It's so interesting. Mother Nature is taking you naturally to some spots.
Yeah, exactly.
I hadn't realized that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Currents
then you land a port, and then can you just walk us through, because you interacted and actually played music, played Irish music for them.
Yeah.
And I mean, how do you engage them from zero to we're going to be friends and we're going to entertain you?
Well, I suppose the best thing is, let me give you an example of one place, because it was one of my favorites anyway. So we have left Fiji and we're coming into this island archipelago called Vanuatu, which I had never heard of before, and you may not have ever heard of. It's very similar to Fiji, but much poorer and smaller, fewer islands. Anyway, we arrived on the island of Tana, and the island of Tana is dominated by a massive live volcano called Yasur. So you're very aware, you can see all the smoke and that it's very aware of this volcano. And anyway, we arrive there's no piers or anything. It's just a little bay. So it's a bay. So you anchor. So we anchored there, and we had heard that there was, what is it called? The Tana Yacht Club. Is that what it was called? I can't remember now. I think it's called the Tana Yacht Club. And so it sounded very glamorous.
Yeah.
So we go ashore, we motor ashore in our little dinghy, and kind of scurry up this cliff. And we had WhatsApped the Commodore of this yacht club, and we met him. His name was Sydney. Anyway, we come up to this. I mean, shack is even too glamorous.
Too generous. Yeah.
I mean, it was literally a lean-to with ripped flags everywhere and a sofa with a big hole in the middle.
This was your St. Francis yacht
of the island of Tana.
Wow.
But gorgeous, friendly welcome, and we had to, the customs had to come, and the next day they came and they have to check us into Vanuatu, because that was the other kind of, my poor brother had to, the paperwork that has to be done for each country ahead of time at the spot. Oh, it's really obnoxious. Anyway, we got it was relatively easy here, and we had a couple of things that we wanted to share with people. And we say to this chap, Sydney, we have a number of things that we'd like to share, but, we want to make sure that you want them or that it's okay. Because you have to be super careful not to be superior and not to be, you just have to be very, very gentle and sort of subtle about it. So we always tried to bring food. So we had canned food, and non-perishable kind of stuff. And so he was delighted with that. I didn't bring it the first time. We talked and said, yes, food yes, absolutely. Clothing, yes, because, there's only so much space on a boat, and everywhere you go, you buy something. So that means you have to get rid of something.
Exactly.
Which is, that's a first world problem. But anyway, but it was nice to have clothing to give people.
Right, and you brought eyeglasses to people.
And that was the other thing. We brought we joined this group called Sea Mercy, humanitarian organization that gives you a kit and trains you on how to test, the level of glass that they need, the strength.
It's just so interesting. And you mentioned to me that there was a woman who was
in this village
of sorts, and she was unable to weave
thread her needle
because she had declined eyesight for years and years. Wow. Sabine hands her a pair of glasses and changes her life.
Yeah, it was totally cool.
That's extraordinary.
And she doesn't read, so she doesn't. And all these are reading glasses. But it did the job for her. That was a pretty. Not talk about a magical moment. That's another magical moment. Anyway, so yes, we told him about the eyeglasses. And we said also we love doing school visits. We'd love to come play music to you and tell the kids about what we're doing and share some of our culture and our background. And then hopefully, you will share with us.
Right.
And so all of these were yeses in this particular case.
Thanks for listening to part 1 of our conversation with Sabine. Keep your ears peeled for part 2, where we go deep on her mission, hear about some of her dicier moments, and get some advice on how to get involved in a sailing journey of your own.
Thanks for listening to the Midlife Mischief Club podcast. Please be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss an episode. You can find show notes, links to our socials, and see what else is cooking on our website at midlifemischiefclub.com.